When I first opened up my business, one industry I discovered that was in need of an overhaul was the merchant processing industry. They're essentially the go-between between credit cards and banks that ensure that businesses can actually take a credit card. Well, I discovered it's not a very healthy industry by experiencing really bad customer service. If you're in the business of making money by accepting credit cards, you will care a lot about customer service because one day, I promise you, your credit card machine won't work and you're going to need that great customer service then. Well, Caleb Avery is the CEO and founder of Tilled, and he has done the remarkable work of making his business stand out above the others in the merchant processing industry. He's focused a lot on culture and has made Tilled a great place to work, which results in great customer service and more customers and more profit. And I'm thrilled to be joining him in a rare in-person interview. Caleb Avery, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming into the office today. It's always nice to be able to do an in-person podcast. This is my second in-person podcast, and unfortunately the final recording that we're doing in the podcast studio. But really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Yeah, today. It's great stuff. So, all right, so tell us a little bit about Tilled and what your employees, and kind of give us a little bit about culture background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Caleb Avery. I'm the founder and CEO here at Tilled. A little bit about Tilled. So our platform we call PayFac as a service, and generally speaking, we're providing a turnkey white label payments infrastructure solution to other software companies. And so we're working typically with vertical software companies like dental practice management software, nonprofit donation management platforms, golf course management platforms. And so we're providing them a set of APIs for them to be able to embed payments within the business. And as you said, in the intro, the payment space is not exactly known for its ethos and its business practices. And so for us at Tilled, it really starts with the company mission and the company values. And so for us, that company mission is empowering ISVs to be able to monetize their payments. But the second part of the mission is this idea of changing the payments landscape for the better. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. I mean, I started my career in the payment space at 19. Wow. And the first business, the motto is merchant services done right. And so, from 19 years old, going out in the field and talking with merchants, you got this sense immediately that they weren't really happy with the experience that they were getting from their banks or their processor or whoever they were using currently. And some of it came down to customer service, but some of it was just the kind of general ethos about how these companies approached deceptive marketing practices or constantly increasing, the rates to their customers. And so for me in my first company and for me at Tilled, we really want to be changing the payments landscape for the better and approaching the business with this idea of fairness and transparency at the forefront. And I really think that sets the tone for the culture here at Tilled.
Absolutely. I mean, I think all that stuff trickles out, like you said, the ethos. But I mean, my experience was when I first got, opened up Turning the Corner, and I had to get that more the merchant side, not so much the embedded part of it. But I mean, I just couldn't get anyone to explain it to me well. I would have people hang up on me, and I'm not upset, wasn't upset. Just like, can you help explain it? And they were so frustrated with their jobs, and I thought, oh my gosh, not only did I not know about this industry before I opened up my business, because it's kind of a hidden in this industry in the banking world, but all of a sudden I was like, oh, this place, they need help. So I'm extremely happy to talk with you and hear your goal with this too, because it's an industry that is in great need of being changed. So tell us, like, what has happened over the last few years then? Like, how did you bring in some of your first employees, and where are you at now? Like, number of employees and types of people?
Yeah. So, I started this, it would have been January of 2019. So we're just now, 4 years into the journey, building out the business. At this point, we've got over 60 employees on the team, but we've grown very rapidly. So we started 2021 with 5 people on the team. We ended, I think, around 40 people on the team in 2021, at this point, north of 60 people. And so we've really seen, this incredibly rapid growth in the business. When I think about, how that impacts the culture, I think early on in the business when, it's myself, co-founders, the first couple of people in the organization, you don't really have to be as intentional about establishing the culture because it's just a very tight group of people that are, very aligned. And I spent a lot of time, recruiting those folks and like personally interviewing them and making sure that we're bringing the right people into the organization. Whereas, as we started to scale, I think when COVID started, we had 3 people on the
Wow.
team. And so we've really built the entire organization remote first, in that kind of post-COVID environment where, we've got employees in states, all across the country. Despite having the office here in Colorado, we are a remote first organization. I think as we started to scale up that team and build out that remote first part of the organization, that's when we really needed to be more intentional about the culture, because we're not going into an office. I'm not seeing all the employees, on a regular basis. And so I think those first couple of months of COVID was the first time that I really started to be more intentional, thinking about like, well, what is the culture, that we want to set within the organization. And then as the organization started to scale, I think that was another inflection point in that kind of cultural journey of the organization where, when we hit, I don't know, probably 20, 25 people, I was no longer like personally interviewing everybody coming into the organization. And we were building out this layer of like leaders in the organization that themselves were turning into hiring managers and building out, that next layer of the organization. So for me, what I really tried to emphasize was building out that group of leaders at that kind of next layer in the organization that were aligned with me on what culture meant to me and the values that were important to me. Because otherwise, as they're building out their organizations, underneath them, you start to see, the culture of the organization start to stray.
Absolutely. I mean, matter of fact, that is the thing I coach leaders on, is when you end up with that second level of management where that you've got managers managing managers, that your only job is to mentor and coach them and help them figure out how to knock down barriers for their people, and how to build the culture out through them. Because if you don't do that, your culture starts to implode from the inside out, which is terrible. So that's very wise of you.
Yeah, it was something that I think we just kind of were forced to learn. For me, my first company that I had built out was really remote first, in the sense that we were bringing on 1099 agents, and so that was kind of the world that I was familiar with. That wasn't necessarily the original plan for Till, but when COVID hit, it's like, well, none of us are in the office,
Right.
Anyways. And so, we kind of went with, that remote first side of building. I think one of the other things that was really impactful for us was really looking at like organizational design from a very, very early stage, of the organization, trying to be thoughtful about not only the people that we're bringing into the organization, but making sure that we're setting up the right roles at the right time, for the growth of the business. And I think that combination of the emphasis on culture, mission, vision, values, alongside the emphasis on organizational design, has allowed us to I'd say make less mistakes hiring, because you always make mistakes, especially growing at the pace that we have. But it's something that we've at least tried to be intentional about, but also learn quickly from our mistakes.
That's excellent. Yeah, no, it's impossible to have every hire be perfect, I think. I mean, this is the work I do, and I still make mistakes. And so it's not very many, and I learn a lot of good lessons along the way, but yeah, it's very hard to have perfect hires all the time. So now you're at upwards of 60 people. Do you plan to keep on growing?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for us, we've got several open roles, out there on our job board, today, and we continue to see, growth from our underlying customer base. And so definitely, strong plans to continue growing the organization, and primarily continuing with a remote first organization.
Yeah. So do you hear from other founders and entrepreneurs, in our circle, about a lack of that belief of, remote first? Do you hear other people kind of say, no, they need to be in office?
I definitely feel like, especially the last, 6 months, you've started to kind of hear rumblings of people going back on that concept of remote first being the kind of preferred method, or the only path. I think there's definitely value in getting together in person. I think we've been moving, I don't know if hybrid is the right word, but we've certainly been getting our leadership team out in Colorado, about once a month. And so, we're still, remote first. Everybody's, primarily working from home, but, on some regular cadence, every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, getting together in person. We had a couple of months ago, we actually had the entire company come out here to Colorado. So I think for me, kind of where I stand on remote first is that I personally love working from home. Like I've got, little kids at home, and I just love the flexibility that comes, from working from home. But I also see a ton of inherent value in being in person and having, the ability to build, the camaraderie outside of, Zoom calls. But for me, I think we've been able to find, that balance where we can have people live, wherever they want, and have the benefit from a talent pool perspective of being able to recruit, anywhere in the country versus,
A
a
local
15-mile radius from,
Right.
Boulder, Colorado is obviously a much smaller, talent pool than when we go nationwide. And that's kind of how we've been managing it.
And I feel like it's working.
I certainly do. I think for us, being able to have that balance of the in-person interaction, I think has been able to minimize some of the consequences, that some folks feel with the remote first side of it. The second part of it, I think for us, since we started remote first, when we had 3 employees, when COVID hit, we've been able to build the foundation of the culture in such a way where we built it with that remote first, side of the organization of mine. And so we've got, I think, the right cadence of, all company Zoom meetings, and we've set up a fund committee, and like being able to interact asynchronously on Slack, and just have the ability to still build that community, even though we're all distributed.
That's great. And I mean, what we've been recommending to companies is if you're going to go into more of a hybrid mode where you're going to have some people in office, make it so that everybody's in office the same day or the same couple of days, and then flexible the rest of the time.
Right.
So that you can at least build that camaraderie when people are here, instead of like my husband's company, they, where he works, they say, come in twice a week. Well, he's been in there days when there's no one else in the office, and
then
that's
you're not
like
really getting the benefit.
completely defeats the purpose. And so it's like you got to kind of make core hours and then make flexible hours. And so, or do what you've done where you're flying people in on some sort of a cadence as well to build that camaraderie. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate to kind of have the resources to be able, to do that, which isn't necessarily practical for every company, but it's worked really well for us.
Well, when we lost our office, we ditched the office after our lease was up, because it was up in 2021. And so now we're taking all that money we're saving and just distributing it to flying people in.
Yeah, that works too.
It's a little budget item shift, right? Because we're not paying rent. Yeah. So that's not a fun check to write every month, especially when it's empty. So then when you think about then the beginning of the culture a few years ago, even though it's been pretty rapid, have you noticed anything with your values shifting as you've grown?
I think it's been more that we've been more intentional about the values. I don't know that the values themselves have necessarily changed, but like we probably didn't have, written down company core values and like a written down mission for, I'd bet, I don't know, the first 2 years of the organization. And so I think the values that we have written down today, fairness and transparency, a winning mindset, we're not your grandma's payments company. Like those are the values that I think I was inherently representing, and that I was inherently, putting out there, but it wasn't really spoken. It wasn't really necessarily known by, everyone. But they were the values that I was, feeling like we were trying to put forward into the organization. It was really as we started to scale, where we started to get questions about, well, like, does this decision make sense? That I was like, oh, maybe everyone doesn't really understand the values that I'm trying to bring, into the organization. So as we started to publish that mission, as we started to publish the values, and at this point, every single time we get, the entire team together, we're reinforcing the mission, the vision, the values, of the organization. So I think that's been the shift, that we've just been more vocal and pronounced about sharing those. And then as we've grown, over the last, I'd say year or so, from an HR function perspective, we're now doing like performance reviews, thinking about, the core values in mind, from a hiring or a firing, perspective, factoring in the core values into those conversations. And so it's become a more integrated part of the experience, at Till, whereas in the early days, it was kind of informal and unspoken, but largely the same values.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought when I first started doing this, I would have thought that the values would shift as the organization grew. But I've actually been hearing from more and more people that they've held on to their values. And I've experienced that too. The values that we put together, when we were 10 years or 2 years old, are the same ones we're still using now as a 12-year-old company. And I just think that's amazing, because I would have thought it would have definitely shifted. But I think when it really comes down from the leader and what your expectations are and what you are wanting out of your employees, that's going to trickle down. And so maybe someday when the leadership changes, if it does, maybe the values will shift, but who knows, maybe not even.
Yeah, I think for while I'm here, they'll probably be pretty similar.
Yeah.
You never know.
Exactly. That's great. So then, what have been some of the things that you feel like, you brought into this role just intrinsically with who you are versus things you've really had to, I guess, deal with, like, we all have, I call it head trash, where we had to, consult with people, get advice, get help. But what did you bring intrinsically that you feel like has really worked well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always go back to is this idea of fairness and transparency. And I think, when you look at kind of where I started my career, merchant services done right, and then, how I've wanted to build out Till and just to me, when I talk about fairness and transparency, I think about it as like a lens for making, decisions. And so when we're making, big decisions, is that fair? Is that transparent? Are we going about this, the right way? And I think for me, that's just something that comes, naturally, and is something that's really, important to me in terms of, what have I had to kind of learn and adapt to. I think for me, this idea of trying to transition from like a founder role into more of a CEO, role has been probably the kind of less natural side of the evolution of my journey. Just getting used to managing a team of 60 plus people is certainly a learning experience. It requires a lot of changes on my end. That's something that I'm continually trying to learn and evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a sign behind me, and normally that's in the podcast. It says, "I am not the leader I need to be a year from now, but I will grow."
I love that.
Yeah, because I think that's been my big discovery too. I felt like coming from IBM, I was very well trained, very well mentored or whipped into shape, so to speak. And so I felt like I brought that into the role, but it's, as you grow, it's never enough. You have to constantly keep growing as a leader. And so have you had coaching? Have you joined any organizations? Like, what have been some of your resources?
Yeah, so I think for me, one, have tried to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, that have more experience, than I do, in the form of advisors, in the form of investors, and even just the leadership team that I've built around me. We've also had a couple of different executive coaches that we've worked with. Finally found one that we're really excited about and has worked really well for our team, where, one, he's helping us kind of develop as a business and put in the right kind of operating systems and meeting cadences and things like that. But a big part of the emphasis is like personal growth for all of us on the leadership team, because as you say, like the needs of the organization change over time, and it's the needs of the organization on me, the needs of the organization on the leadership team, the individual contributors. Like, as the business grows, like it is this, evolving organism, and the needs, change over time. And we as individuals have to decide, like, are we up to the challenge of adapting, as the organization grows? And if not, well, then, that can be pretty difficult to kind of keep people in those roles if they're not, evolving with the needs of the business.
Absolutely. I think that adaptability is one of the most important things that leaders do. And it is not normal. Most leaders are not very adaptable, especially, I would say, the ones that have maybe are a little more older school in terms of the way they think. And they say, this is the policy, we're going to be rigid with this. There is no flexibility. This is the way that it is. And that's not the world anymore.
Yeah.
We have to be adaptable. I always think of my business now as more of almost like an ecosystem, where you don't know what species or weather or impact you're going to have. It's going to force you to have to do something totally different. But if you're adaptable, you can actually usually survive that. So,
well, and some of the changes come from within, where the needs of an organization with 5 people versus 65 people are very different. But some are external. Like, you look at kind of the macro shifts that have happened over the last 2 years. Like the world that we live in today in terms of our customers' needs and the problems, that they're facing, pretty different than they were, 2, 3, years ago. And so we have to be willing to kind of listen, adapt, and understand, the needs of what's happening both within and, externally, from the business, and then be able to adapt to those changes.
Absolutely. Well, my goodness, we wish you the best of luck on this journey as you continue to grow. So I think that's a perfect place to stop. So I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. Hopefully that you liked my profile, because I was very engaging talking here. But we will hopefully see you next time on How I Turned the Corner, and we'll carry on this conversation. We'll check back in with Caleb in a couple of months as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much for
All
being
right.
on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Great.